Welcome to the 7th in a series of interviews with candidates to replace Representative Niki Tsongas in the U.S. House of Representatives. I'm Peggy Wargelin, a member of Concord Citizens Protecting Progress. Today we welcome Dan Koh, former Chief of Staff to Boston Mayor Marty Walsh. Thank you so much for taking the time to come.
Thank you. It's an honor to have me.
Nice.
Yeah, honor to be here.
Excellent. Okay.
Yeah.
Most of the questions will be about your knowledge and philosophy of government, as well as your strategies for making decisions. We'll end with a lightning round asking you to quickly comment on other issues important to our members. Let's start with a 2-minute biography. What would you like voters to know about you?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate it. You know, my family comes from two different parts of this world, Lebanon and Korea. They couldn't have looked more different. They couldn't have spoken a more different language, but they had one thing in common, and that's they believe deeply in this country, that if you come to America and you work hard, that your kids could live a better life than you could. So they came to Lawrence, Massachusetts. My great-grandfather worked in the mills, came from Lebanon, and his son, my grandfather, served in the military, World War II in Korea, and then started a small business in Lawrence that exists to this day with my mom and her two brothers. And so my family's lived the American dream. And as a result, a Korean Lebanese guy has a chance to be a congressman from his hometown district. And I'm running because I believe that American dream story is under attack. And I think that we need to get back to fighting for the values that make the American dream possible for all of us. So instead of cutting healthcare from 23 million Americans, let's double down and make sure that every single person in this country has good, quality, affordable healthcare as a right, and that we fight for a single-payer system. Let's make sure that instead of giving a tax break to the 1% and corporations that don't need it, let's give it to the middle class, and let's create an economy where there is a $15 minimum wage, where people get equal pay for equal work, where people get access to paid leave, and that we have a comprehensive infrastructure bill in this country that doesn't apply to just roads and bridges, but to school buildings that are badly need of repair. And let's fight for what makes America truly great. You know, when I was Chief of Staff to Mayor Walsh in Boston, we fought back against Donald Trump's first year in the administration. You know, when he pulled out of the Paris Climate Accords, we doubled down and said Boston would be carbon neutral by 2050. When he instituted his racist travel ban, we opened up City Hall to immigrants who were feeling threatened and said we would protect you. And I think we still need to keep doing that when it comes to common sense gun reform. Let's pass that finally. Let's ban bump stocks. Let's have universal background checks. Let's ban assault weapons. And finally, let's push back against Secretary DeVos's attacks against public education that we see every single day. We can't normalize the behavior of this president. We can never take for granted how fragile democracy is. And that's why I'm running, because I think we need to fight for that America that we believe in.
Okay. The first group of questions asks about your opinions about the federal government. What types of programs should the federal government be responsible for?
Well, listen, I think that the federal government's main goal every day should be how do we help as many people as possible, and how do we create resources that really help cities and towns be able to do that to the best end. Being a former Chief of Staff, this is a particular passion of mine, because I saw a lot of very well-intentioned federal officials who had great ideas but really didn't know how to execute it at the local level. So I think we need to be deferential to our local officials and say, okay, we want to create resources that will help target the opioid epidemic, for example, but let's empower the great nonprofits and hospitals that know how to treat it and are doing great work by giving them money that they know where to reallocate it to. So let's not attach so much red tape so that it can't be done. You know, I was in Gardner earlier today and talking to Gamma, which is an amazing organization. And I've talked to them in the past, and they say there are some federal resources out there that we don't even go for because there's so much red tape. So let's change the mindset. Let's change the mindset from DC knowing everything and being arrogant about knowing everything to DC should work for local cities and towns. And that's what I really believe, and that's why I'm really running, because I think that it's really important to have someone with that local perspective in government.
Okay. Describe one program run by the federal government you feel is especially successful and effective, and explain why you think that is so.
Yeah, so you know, there's obviously so many different programs that I think make a lot of sense for people, but Medicare is one that I think is something that is effective, has a lot more work to do, but is something that I think is true to who we are as a country, which is we take care of people who need it the most, and we allow people, I believe we should continue to allow people to retire with dignity, right? And so Medicare is something that I believe deeply in. It's still not perfect. I was on the phone recently with someone who told me about their condition, type 1 diabetes, that they're using a new technology for, not covered by Medicare. So they're paying an extra $400 a month to have it, and they don't know how they're going to pay for it long term. That's a huge issue. But by and large, people really like Medicare, and I think it's true to who we are. And so I support Senator Sanders' Medicare for All. I think we need to go to a single-payer system in this country. And most importantly, we just have to have a system where a pre-existing condition is not a prescription to poverty. But we're seeing it every day, and that's wrong. We're seeing grandparents, one grandparent working 2 jobs because the other grandparent's getting sick. That's wrong. And in a country supposedly as prosperous as this one, we need to take a stand and say that our values is providing affordable health care. Let's figure out how we pay for it, not throw up all these roadblocks to stop it from happening.
Sure. Now describe a federal program you feel is not successful. What improvements would you suggest?
Well, look, I think that the problem that we have in our defense budget is that the president likes to talk about how we have to take care of our vets. I completely agree. But he's not being true to what he's saying. If you look at the $150 billion increase in defense spending we've done, a lot of that is going to increasing our nuclear arsenal and not going to actually helping vets, right? It's going to President Trump's proposed military parade that would cost tens of millions of dollars at a minimum, right? And so if we're going to increase our funding with regard to the military and defense, let's do it towards making sure that we're taking care of our vets, both keeping them safe when they're overseas, but when they come back, mental health services, for example, making sure that, if God forbid, a person loses his or her life overseas, that we take care of their families. That's not us being true to who we are. And so it's easy for the president to say, we're going to be the most competitive, we're going to spend $8 billion on a nuclear sub, which is one of his proposals. But how about all that money going towards actually helping veterans, making the VA more consistent? Because some veterans really love the VA and it works really well for them. Other veterans don't because their VA isn't as of the same quality. Let's work to level that playing field and actually modernize the VA so it's helping people.
Sure. When is it appropriate to make use of private sector resources like outsourcing and public-private partnerships for government functions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it is when it helps the common good that more people are being helped. I think it doesn't work when it's used to skirt laws, right? And so what we're seeing, especially in the labor movement these days, especially under Republican control, is that public-private partnerships are being used to skirt union friendly laws. And so all of a sudden projects that should be union aren't being made union because of these antiquated policies. That's a real concern. And I think we need to really make sure that we are paying attention to those loopholes that public-private partnerships really come up with. I think it's really important for a government and a congressman, quite frankly, or a congresswoman, to work really closely with the private sector to help bring good jobs to different areas of the district. Lawrence, Massachusetts is a classic example of that, a place that needs more economic development and needs allies at all levels of government to really help people. But the problem is, right now, I think a lot of times that kind of collaboration isn't really paid attention to in the way that it should. I think people in DC are much more excited to go on TV and scream about how bad everyone else is than actually focus on how you deliver for the district. That's something that I really want to prioritize.
Okay. What federal government programs have you or members of your extended family benefited from?
Listen, I've been really, really lucky. For me, as someone who worked as a chief of staff in Boston, really seeing firsthand how good government programs can actually really, really help people. First of all, I wouldn't have existed today if not for a more inclusive immigration policy that existed in 1890 when my great-grandfather came here at the time from Syria, which wouldn't have been allowed today. So I wouldn't have existed if Donald Trump were president 100 years ago, which is kind of crazy that we have a more progressive immigration policy back then than today, right? But I also saw firsthand how good government policy can really, really help people, and that's the reality. And so I think that we need to make sure that we are providing enough resources to really make a difference in people's lives, whether it's money to make sure our streets are paved nicely, or whether it's money for public schools and school infrastructure. That's something that I think that is really critical. And when I was with Mayor Walsh in Boston, we dedicated $1 billion to school infrastructure to make sure that all of our schools were as competitive as possible, and quite frankly, that kids were in learning environments that allowed them to prosper. It's a problem today that I think Democrats seem to be ashamed to talk about investing and spending money, when in reality I think we should be proud to say that we are the party that invests in people's futures, whether that's their education, whether it's their jobs, whether it's providing for their family through making sure they have access to good health care. That's something that should be bedrocks of the Democratic Party, and I believe deeply in it.
Okay. The next set of questions is about how you obtain and use information.
Yep.
What is a fact to you, and how are facts important in your decision making?
Yeah, I mean, look, there are some things that obviously become political, but facts are facts, right? Climate change is real. Let's stop the nonsense, right? And let's be outspoken about these kind of things. Let's be outspoken about the fact that other countries that have better common sense gun safety are safer countries. It's statistical facts. It's not exaggeration, it's not politics, right? And so sure, there are some things that should be political and talked out, people have different opinions on. But when it comes to gun control, when it comes to climate change, like let's not beat around the bush. Let's be real about the implications. You can argue those are true facts, but I actually don't, I don't want, safer gun rules, right? Some people say that. Fine, but don't say that it's not true. Don't say that other countries that have fewer firearms in the street don't have lower homicide rates. It's just true, right? And so that's why I think it's so important. I mean, we've come to a point where Donald Trump has taken Republican agenda and taken it to an extreme where I think Republicans played a little fast and loose with some facts, but now he's just denying that anything exists, right? Fake news has become a term that Democrats use these days. That's wrong. The reality is there are some things that are facts, and we need to have mutually agreed upon basis on that. And until then, we just need to continue to put out the urgency around these things, the urgency around climate change. For a lot of us, the long-term effects of climate change will happen after we're gone. But the reality is, my kids and my grandkids are going to face the consequences of, quite frankly, ignorant politicians, or not even ignorant politicians, I think sinister politicians who know the truth, but know it's more convenient to just deny it all.
All right. Do you verify information provided to you?
I do. I think it's really important too, as well. I think.
So how do you decide what sources of information to trust?
Yeah, look, in this day and age, it's difficult because I think a lot of sources have their own biases. A lot that you find on the internet, on Facebook, no disrespect to friends who share things, but oftentimes they're from biased sources. So I think it's important for people to do their own research and to look at trusted sites. I worked in journalism. I worked as Arianna Huffington's chief of staff. And I see just the extent to which journalists really try hard to get their facts right. New York Times, CNN, places like that, they do their homework. This is not, they do their homework. They don't publish unless there's truth. And if they make a mistake, they put out a retraction. That's what journalists do. And this president has created an environment where we doubt any kind of person who disagrees with him. And it's that kind of mentality that I think is wrong. Like, there is a process to verify facts that every person should take through. And going on Breitbart or going on, these conspiracy theory websites hurts our democracy badly.
Sure. How do you communicate with people who trust different information sources than you do?
Yeah, it's challenging. There's absolutely no easy way to address this, right? I think it's just really important to not be combative about this when you're with your friends, right?
Yeah.
But just say, listen, that's just simply not true, and here's why. Here's the sources. Let me explain it to you, right? The problem is we have a system that the president has perpetuated where even reputable sources get denied by these people to the extreme. So with your friends, I think you can be civil. When it comes to politics in D.C., I think the Democrats got to get much more aggressive with our messaging. For too long, I think we've rolled over and allowed the Republicans to dictate messaging, right? When it comes to terms like pro-life, right to work, death panels, these are all phrases invented by Republicans to damage the Democratic agenda that the Democrats have just embraced. I think that's wrong. I mean, Democrats should be proud to be the party of the future, proud to be the party of jobs and the future of work. These are things that we need to be up front on. And quite frankly, call out this president for the fact that every single thing that comes out of his mouth every day makes us less safe as a country, is un-American. What he did in Helsinki was treasonous, okay? So to side with a Russian operative who has been proven to rig our elections over our intelligence community is unpatriotic at best. And so the notion that we should let that slide as normal because, haha, it's Donald Trump, I vehemently disagree with, and we need to get angry about that.
Sure. Let's move on to the specific elected position you're running for.
Sure.
Why do you want to be the U.S. Representative for Massachusetts District 3?
Yeah. I talked about my family story here, and, I think back to 1981 where my Korean American father and my Lebanese American mother got married at St. Augustine's Church in Andover. weren't that many Asians in the district at the time, especially not many interracial couples, you know, and they were embraced and they were loved here, you know. And well before that union happened, my great-grandfather came here as an immigrant to Lawrence, Massachusetts from very humble beginnings, no college degree, worked his way up in the mill, grew up on Cross Street, and this district embraced him. This district has embraced my family, allowed my family to live the American dream, and I really do believe that threat is happening today, especially that American dream story is under threat today, especially when we have a president who seems hell-bent on ripping families apart. We need people in DC who understand that story and want to see that perpetuated. I'd also say that I've been really, really lucky. I've been able to work for a number of different people who are in it for the right reasons. I work for Ted Kennedy, I work for Mayor Menino, and I work for Mayor Walsh. These are people who are in it because they care about people, and I saw firsthand that if you first and foremost care about people, you can make a ton of difference in people's lives if you're in these positions. If you don't, you can do a lot less good. In fact, you can do harm. For me, every day it's about helping people. It's about making sure that people are getting the services they need. People make fun of me because I often give out my cell phone number, but my cell phone number for people listening is 978-225-7455. I've been giving it out. People have been calling me. The best conversations I've had on the trail, quite frankly, have been the ones people calling my cell phone, because I believe that if I'm fortunate enough to get to DC, the least I can do is be accessible to people.
Sure. How long have you lived in the district?
So I grew up here. You know, my family originally from Lawrence, then moved to Methuen, then moved to Andover, and I grew up right across from Andover High School for my entire life until I was 18. I went to college, and then, you know, long story short, went to Boston to work as the mayor's chief of staff, and then came back to Andover after Congresswoman Tsongas announced that she was retiring. And again, it's the community that's given me everything, and I believe deeply in it. I'm biased, but I believe this is the best district to raise a family in the world. And I can't tell you how much it means to me to be doing this, and honestly to just be meeting so many people who are so fired up to take back our country. The cynicism and the division, DC's never been worse, but I think the fire in the bellies of so many people in this district to fight for the America that you and I both love is so real, and it's something that we need to make sure we tap into right now to keep this momentum going straight through 2020 when we get President Trump out of the White House.
This is a very diverse district. Mm-hmm. How do you plan to represent the interests of people with such varying concerns and views of what government can and should do?
Yeah, you know, for me, and this is a statement that we've been talking a lot about on the trail, is just doing the work. That means a lot of things, but the bottom line is the issues that are facing Concord today, Gardner today, Haverhill, no matter where you go, there will be issues that will come up over the next 2 years and hopefully much longer if I'm fortunate enough to get this seat that we don't know. And the only way to know is to be present in the communities and to be in close contact with the local elected officials and activists in the towns and cities. I don't know what those will be in the coming years. I have a feeling because of this president, hopefully it won't last for 2 more years, but might. But those issues are going to come up, and what I think that people want is someone who's going to be not only responsive but present. I think that's the most important thing. So the way you do that, quite frankly, is just doing the work, being at the communities, being at the high school graduations and Little League, you know, opening days, being at the grocery stores, talking to people. That's something that, quite frankly, I learned from local politics. You know, Marty Walsh, the mayor of Boston, who was his chief of staff for the first term, won by 32 points re-election. And the reason why he did was because he did that work. People loved the fact that he was present in the community. And again, I think DC elected officials have gotten away with this mentality of I don't have to be present, and when I do, I should be special and it should be a, you know, ribbon cutting or whatever. That's not the case. The case should be I work for you, I work for you, I work for the elected officials, I work to be in the communities listening to people, then I get people what they ask for, not the other way around. Not here's a bureaucratic grant that might come if you spend a lot of time applying for it, but you know, I can only write a letter and that's it. That tends to be the mentality in DC, and I just think that's wrong.
Okay. What concerns do you hear about from voters most often, and what are the issues you're most concerned about personally?
Yeah, and so it kind of goes back to what we were talking about earlier. Healthcare is by far number one. You know, again, it is scary that all of us have financial insecurity based solely on what might happen to our bodies that we have absolutely no control over, right? So that's the first thing. You know, people like to give Bernie Sanders a lot of criticism over his single-payer plans. People like to reject single-payer outright. But if you actually look at the data, even the most high estimates of how much single-payer would cost is cheaper than our current system. And so the notion that we shouldn't be pursuing that, or the notion that that's unrealistic, so let's focus only on the ACA, I think is a false choice. We need to focus on the highest priority right now is making sure that every single person in this district has access to good quality, affordable health care. Secondly, despite the fact that the economy is growing under Trump's vision, right, the reality is I hear all the time that people are really scared about their jobs and where the economy is going to go. With technology moving at the rate it is, there's estimates of at least 10 to 20 million people in this country losing their jobs overnight. And we need to make sure that we are setting up a system so that people can succeed in this new economy. And I think that's based in making sure that we have educational opportunities available to people so that they can get the training they need. That starts at the very beginning. That starts with universal pre-K for everybody, because if you look at the data, if you start people on that early life, early education, they're much more likely to be successful later in life. Same goes for free public education if you make under a certain amount of household income. Let's invest in people, because I think the long-term investment is there. Let's do the same thing for community college. And if we use that platform to set up that ecosystem, then all of a sudden the Democrats become the party of jobs again, really get out in front of that, and quite frankly, will probably appeal to a lot of the voters we may have lost in 2016.
Okay. Let's see. Please tell us about how you're financing your campaign.
Yeah. You know, this is the toughest and most frustrating part of a campaign. You know, we have a system that doesn't work. I believe deeply in it. I believe deeply in the fact that we have a system that doesn't work. And I believe deeply that we need comprehensive campaign finance reform. And so, honestly, the way I started was begging my family and friends for resources and reaching out to people who have seen my work and hopefully thought I'd be a good congressman. The bottom line, though, is that we have so many issues with regard to campaign finance that we need to reform. First and foremost, we need to end Citizens United. It's a horrible decision. It's a decision that literally has caused big corporations to be able to get involved in elections and swing them based solely on how much money they have. That's completely wrong. Corporations are not people, and no one can ever convince me that that's the case, and that's wrong. I think we need to go further than that, though. I think we need to go to a publicly financed election system. There's a great bill that's in D.C., the Government by the People Act, that looks at matching small donations as long as you pledge not to take a certain donation higher. I think that's really important. Senator Russ Feingold, who was the architect of the McCain-Feingold campaign finance reform, has endorsed our campaign. And he understands what I understand, which is that in order for us to really have a true democracy that works, we need to have comprehensive campaign finance reform.
Sure. What are your criteria for accepting or declining contributions?
Listen, you know, this is a whole system that, you know, again, is in need of complete reform. But what I would say is this, you know, I've been fortunate to have support of people who say, I know your work, I know who you are, I know what you stand for, and I believe in you. And that's really, you know, when I pursue resources, that's what I want to make sure is, does this person understand who I am, what I stand for, and do they support similar things? And that's why I think that this country should, in a system that works well, people are supporting people because of what they stand for and what they believe in. I think what we're seeing in D.C., however, is that people are being funded by interests who want them to sway a certain way. There's nothing more blatant of an example than the NRA. The NRA is paying off not just Republicans, but Democrats as well, to vote in the interests of the NRA. And that's simply wrong. And so in our campaign, we've gotten a little more aggressive about it, and we've identified 10 Republican congresspeople who are in swing areas, who need to vote the right way on gun reform, who have taken money from the NRA, and we've just been calling them. And so we've been out front on our social media about it, and I think we need to get more aggressive about that. You know, it's not going to change unless A, people who care a lot about gun reform know what bill is the gun reform bill. I don't know, you probably don't know, we need to know. Let's rally around it. And two, let's get aggressive and say that it's on us if we don't act now. We can't have children continuing to go to school starting in August and September and worried about whether they're coming home because we don't have politicians who have the guts to act in D.C. So let's be more aggressive with our messaging. Let's say that there are people accepting money from the NRA. And that's really important because public perception makes a difference with these politicians. And we saw how the ACA was saved when people took to the streets, they took to the office buildings of these Congress people, stood outside and demanded action. And it took one vote to save it, right? But it got us to the point where we saved healthcare for 23 million Americans. We need to do the same thing for gun reform and, quite frankly, for the values that we hold dear as Democrats.
Sure. National politics is increasingly marked by rancor and division, and dealing with this will be a large part of the job. Describe a past situation where you had to work to get something done with a group of people who strongly disagreed with your position.
Yeah, it's difficult, right? And every situation is different. But frankly, as a chief of staff to a city of Boston, any issue that would come to my desk, no disrespect, but in all humility, was one that couldn't be solved in different parts of the city that we had to come to a resolution. And what I found was the process of getting to yes takes a lot of work, takes a lot of time, getting people into a room, figuring out how to execute it. You have the best ideas in the world, but if you can't figure out how to execute it, doesn't matter. And so one of the things that we felt really strongly was, let's take the time to hash out where our differences are and find out where the overlaps are. One example of this was when General Electric was trying to find a new headquarters. They were based in Connecticut. They were looking for a new headquarters. There are certain city incentives that a city can offer. There are certain state incentives that a state can offer. And so instead of fighting with each other, Governor Baker and Mayor Walsh got into a room and said, let's have two people from both sides get into a room, hash all of it out, right? And so it was myself and Chief Economic Development John Barrows. It was Steve Kadish, the governor's chief of staff, and the chief of economic development for the state, Jay Ash. We got into a room and we just hashed out the most competitive package we could possibly put together. And later, GE told us that was a huge factor in moving 800 jobs to Boston. And so that's what's really important. I will never compromise my values as a progressive, but there's absolutely no reason why I can't reach across the aisle, and if I have a problem with a Republican colleague who's disagreeing with me, that I can't bring her or he into a room and we just talk about it, right? There's no need for the kind of drama we see in DC where everyone's just screaming at each other through the press. That doesn't get anything done. There are too many people in this country who need a leg up. There are too many people going bankrupt because they're getting sick. There are too many people who are dying because they're not getting preventative care because of all the drama in DC. Let's forget about that. Let's cut through that, quite frankly, and let's get to the point of what the problem is, and let's actually get stuff done. That's what you're elected to do, is to get the hard to have the hard conversations to get to yes, not the drama and grandstanding that we're seeing every day. I think everyone's sick of that. And so we can never compromise our values, but I think we can learn a lot from people like Ted Kennedy, who cared a lot about the progressive agenda, but he worked across the aisle to get more of the progressive agenda done. That's a lost art that I think we, quite frankly, need to bring back.
Yeah. So here we go. What is your philosophy on legislative compromise?
Yeah, it's a great question. Look, there are certain things that I think, especially in today's America with President Donald Trump, which I still can't believe every time I say that. For 8 years I woke up proudly in disbelief that we had President Obama, who I was very proud of. Now I'm in utter horror disbelief that we have President Trump, but it is what it is. But I think that there are certain things that the Democratic Party can never compromise on. Things like a woman's right to choose, things like climate change being real, things like common sense gun safety. But when it comes to things that I think benefit all of us regardless of party, like a comprehensive infrastructure bill, there's opportunity for overlap there. And I think the reality is it's finding where those common ground things are and really figuring out how you build working relationships across the aisle on those issues, that then when it comes time for the real difficult conversations, at least there is a history of getting things done and a history of respect, right? Sure. It's a lot harder to pick fights with or go on TV and yell about somebody that you respect or that you have a relationship with. But the reality is that seems to be the default now. Let's yell first and then try to get stuff done. Let's do it the other way around. There's no need for this kind of drama we see.
Sure. Finally, let's touch quickly on some other issues important to our members. Please give a quick response to each issue.
Sure.
Women's right to choose.
Absolutely, steadfast.
Okay. Health care.
Single payer system.
Civil rights.
We have a long way we've made progress, but we've got a long way to go.
Net neutrality.
It is one of the most longest lasting effects of that we will see in the coming decades. It was a horrible decision to do what we did there.
Yeah. Gun regulations.
We need to ban bump stocks, we need to ban assault weapons, we need universal background checks, and we need to ban high-capacity magazines. I don't know why this is so difficult. 80% of Americans agree with that, and we need to finally pass that once and for all.
Sure. The latest round of tax cuts.
Need to be repealed, given only to those people who are in the middle class and working class families. The only part of the tax plan that I like, which was actually introduced by Cory Booker, was the Opportunity Zones program, which allows incentive for investment in areas that are struggling for economic development. In places like Fitchburg, in places like Lowell, in places like Gardner could have huge implications for economic development. So I think we need to take advantage of that opportunity to really help those areas.
Sure. Government policy for the situation in Puerto Rico.
I mean, I think right now that policy is informed by racism and nothing else. These are U.S. citizens. We would never do this in Idaho or in Texas or in Florida or in Massachusetts. Why the hell are we doing it this way in Puerto Rico?
Yeah. Immigration policy.
We need common sense immigration reform. We need to keep families together. We need a path to citizenship. We don't need Senator Cotton's proposal of creating quotas that basically give white countries more privilege into getting into this country than places from others. We should operate by the general premise, which is if you want to come here and work hard, you should be allowed, and we should have a system to allow you to live the American dream.
And finally, campaign finance reform.
We need to end Citizens United. We need to go to publicly financed elections, and until then, we won't see a true democracy.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time.
Nice to talk to you.
Thank you for having me.
We've just finished an interview with Dan Koh, former Chief of Staff to Boston Mayor Marty Walsh, who's running to replace Representative Niki Tsongas in the U.S. House of Representatives. I'm Peggy Wardjulen, a member of Concord Citizens Protecting Progress. Thank you.